What does it mean to be The Undertaker? There are many ways to answer this. From a wrestling fan's perspective, it means being one of the most iconic and enduring characters in the history of professional wrestling, even if he ultimately did hang on a bit too fucking long. I'm John Renton with my review, Biography, WWE Legends Season 2, Episode 1 on The Undertaker, the Phenom, the Lord of Darkness, so many nicknames, so many memories, good, bad, and indifferent, a long goddamn career, and it's hard to encapsulate that in a 2-hour program, basically 80 to 85 minutes with commercials. And I think they actually did a pretty good job with this. Sure, WWE and A&E are basically doing some whitewashing and some fluff piece stuff, but there were some good tidbits in this. Now, yes, for those that are long-time viewers / subscribers to the channel, you may remember that I reviewed every single episode of WWE Undertaker Last Ride, and I stand by everything I said about The Undertaker, aka Mark Calloway, the person. That doesn't take away from what he did in the ring, but, ultimately, there's the iconic character, and there's also the person that I stand by what I fucking said about his views and everything, and I will not fucking apologize one goddamn bit. If you can't handle that, too fucking bad. That being said, there's going to be some great stuff to dive into. A lot of the early footage was really, really cool, that they included and everything. The stuff with his mom was really, really goddamn cool. It was nice that they gave her, subtitles, considering that she's got to at least be 80. I mean, she's had 5 kids. Undertaker is very, very close to 60. And it was cool to hear from her because she added a lot of levity to this, and it was not, the shirt was kind of funny. If you know, but it could have been about comfort. This did bounce around a lot, though. It started off with the night of the Hall of Fame 2022, so just a couple months ago. Tim White was there. Rest in peace, Tim White. There was Johnny Ace there. Fuck Johnny Ace. I hope he's never brought back to wrestling. Don't know what Mrs. Baba saw in him, but nevertheless. Michelle McCalloway, as I'm calling her, Michelle McCool, aka Undertaker's wife. I believe his third wife, if I remember correctly. Whatever. She talks about how tough it was for him to walk away. We get some Hall of Fame 2022 clips. And then we go to him talking to his mother. This was nice. This was cool to see. And she kind of stole the whole goddamn show, in all honesty. She didn't necessarily approve of his, turn to professional wrestling, and they tell some stories throughout the thing, and that was actually pretty cool to see. 5 brothers. I do remember him saying his brother, I believe, Tim. There are some who call him Tim. He passed away just before the Mania 36 Boneyard match, which, that's terrible. Terrible to lose a sibling. It really is, in all honesty. Get to hear from other people close to him. You get to hear from known Vince McMahon puppet Bruce Pritchard. Fuck Bruce Pritchard. His parents should have, done the right thing, so we never had to deal with Bruce Pritchard in this goddamn world. But whatever. Let's be positive. Positive. Chic always positive. Dad worked hard, did plumbing, roofing, worked for the Houston paper. Speaking of Houston wrestling, big influence on anybody from Texas, especially in that area, because he grew up in Houston. Houston wrestling, like, I can only, talk a little bit about what I know from, like, podcasts and just a little bit of history diving that I've done, a little bit of research with Paul Bosch, had such a big money-making machine, and Houston wrestling was so influential. The people they brought in, the talent they used, for years and years, the Sam Houston Coliseum, the Summit, the venues that he ran, there were some great moments in Houston wrestling. There's some Houston wrestling footage floating around. There's a house show from 1979. Paul Bosch understood how to bring professional wrestling to, I guess you could almost say it's seen big league while also seeming territorial, because they have such big name stars. Like, there's interview footage with him and Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant with his big hands, and Paul with his huge ears. But he he talked about how his mother took him to Houston wrestling. He said it's a big mistake or whatever, or look what you ended up doing. Again, the mother was just fucking great in this. Talked about seeing the original Sheik, how him and his brothers and friends were heckling, and the Sheik decided to chase him. Even in, the mid-70s, late 70s, early 80s, like when the Sheik, by his territory, Detroit Wrestling, had basically died. You didn't want to mess with him because he was fucking nuts. Played basketball. We see him playing basketball with one of his daughters. He talks about growing into becoming a better basketball player in junior high and high school. College was a bit tough because he was a more physical player. He would sometimes have quite a few. He would have more points than he would minutes because he would foul out, but he would be very aggressive. That kind of set the tone for how he was going to be in wrestling. Talk about Buzz Sawyer, who at his best was a big goddamn deal in territorial wrestling, and also was a fucking nutcase and drug addict and a goddamn abusing bully. And fuck Buzz Sawyer. I'm glad he's dead. Then Percy Action Jackson. It's a name that I think I've heard. I don't know where the fuck he wrestled. And the training basically was just a Buzz Sawyer's compound, whatever it was. They had like a bunch of Rottweilers. He kept trying to run people off, and Taker kept showing up, and I think it was like $2,500 that he demanded from everybody. Well, Buzz basically made off with the money, and Taker took what little training he got, which wasn't much, and he decided to turn to wrestling. He basically was close to, I believe, graduating college-ish, I believe, if I remember the timeline. His parents didn't approve. His mother even said, "Don't call me for money." It wasn't that she disowned her son. It was just like, what the hell are you doing? You were going to be the first of the family to graduate college. So then he talks about the sportatorium and seeing Fritz von Erich, and Fritz thinking, oh, he looks like David. I mean, he was the dead man or whatever, David Von Erich, and then Undertaker later played the dead man. That's not the only world-class joke I'm going to make. Can't help it. He did kind of look like David Von Erich, in all honesty. Put a mask on. He was Texas Red. And he's a big guy, 6'8", 270, 280. But he faced off against Bruiser Brody. Legit tough. Everything, just beat the shit out of him, as Bruiser Brody was known to do. And then a guy that was from South Africa by the name of Steve Simpson, who I do remember seeing on some of the bigger world-class events. Cotton Bowl Extravaganza, Parade of Champions. Good athlete. Good physique. Looked like if Tom McGee actually had wrestling ability. Anybody remember Tom McGee? Your goddamn brains are exploding. Poor Tom McGee. He didn't deserve nearly as much meme treatment as he got. He had a great look, and that was it. But Steve Simpson, who was from South Africa, it was nice they got him actually for the interview. They got him for that. South African accent still throws me off or whatever. He decides, hey, to take Taker, Calloway at the time, decides to take him, hey, let's come to South Africa. Because apparently South Africa had wrestling as well. Every goddamn country, and every goddamn continent had wrestling. I think even Antarctica did. Granted, the Penguin 1 versus Penguin 2 tag team continued to reign as tag team champions until the polar ice caps melted. And now the world will flood, and these are the days of our lives. He faced off against Tiger Singh. They didn't spend too much time on this, but it was nice to see footage from. I don't know where they got that from. Really, really cool though. Good to see Steve Simpson doing pretty well. And then he came to Memphis, February of 1989. This was right after, a couple months after Super Clash, where Jerry Lawler was still the AWA champion, also the world class champion. He'd beaten Kerry Von Erich in one of the bloodiest matches because Kerry Von Erich decided to take the blade and decided to cut himself, on accident because he did a goddamn nut job. And still, he was never eliminated from the 91-92 Rumbles because both feet must touch the floor. Told you it wasn't the only joke I'd have. But he beat Lawler. He got a little more comfortable on promos. It was cool to hear Dave Brown and Lance Russell call the action. And then because Memphis, let's be perfectly honest, was on its ass at that point. I mean, they still had some hot angles. They could draw some fans. But like any territory that was still around by that point, Vince McMahon was just overtaking. Lawler was king of Memphis, ironically, considering he was the king of wrestling. But the territory itself wasn't doing the best. And that because talent was leaving, they were going for big contracts, like Mark would do, or like Taker would do, rather, when he would take the Master of Pain character, and I believe it was Dutch Mantella talked to Jim Cornette, because Cornette's like, we need a skyscraper. I got one. Well, can we have him? Yes, you can. because I believe he's a great kid, but he's just green, if I recall correctly. And he went there because Sid, I think, got a punctured lung from taking a suplex from one of the Steiners. Which, let's be perfectly honest, the Steiners could probably break every bone in your body by just looking at you, at least at that time. Or maybe it was softball season, because Sid always loved to play softball. Loves Sid. Just wish he was more committed. Speaking of people that should have been committed, Dan Spivey. Was he dead during this interview and they just shocked him back to life? Because Dan Spivey has rotted away. Even since the Brawl for All goddamn thing. No, was it Brawl? No, it wasn't Brawl for All. It was one of the Dark Side of the Ring episodes. It was on... I don't remember. It was one of the recent episodes. I apologize for not. Maybe it was the Road Warriors one. He was on one of those recent ones, but God, he looked terrible. And it had that giant vein in the side of his head or whatever, which had more personality than he ever showed in the ring. And talks about teaming with Dan Spivey. Dan says, hey, let's beat the shit out of the Road Warriors. Just pay attention to me and we'll do that. And then Dan wasn't happy with WCW because they weren't going to feature him because he wasn't any fucking good. And then... he left and Taker, Mark Callis, teamed with Heyman. And it's kind of, he was paired with Teddy Long, part of the Skyscraper, and he was paired with Heyman. And Ole even said because it was going to be a contract renegotiation, Taker was hoping to get more money. And he says, well, you're a great athlete, but no one will pay money to watch you wrestle. People say that Ole was a dick there. Ole, an abrasive son of a bitch. Teddy Long is not a fan of him. A lot of black people were not fans of him, except Thunderbolt Patterson. And if you know, you know. But Ole wasn't wrong. Nobody was going to pay money to watch Mark Callis wrestle. They would pay to watch The Undertaker wrestle. And that's what it came down to. Sometimes being an extension of yourself or getting the right gimmick, getting the right whatever, will succeed. Or you can be like Terry Taylor and get the Red Rooster and it will kill your career. He left WCW. He got the chance to go to WWE. Heyman said, I violated my contract to get him in contact with Bruce Pritchard. Wow, Heyman violated a contract and lying. I'm shocked. I kid. It's just, let's be honest. A lot of the ECW guys got a reason to be mad at Heyman. And Taker ended up, he was hanging out with Heyman in a club. He ended up ripping his suit pants right before he was going to go visit Vince. And he had to try and sew the pants up. 30 minutes turned into 4 hours. Vince really liked Taker as a person, but Undertaker character wasn't formed yet. And then he saw the giant egg, and he was afraid he was going to be the Eggman, Goo Goo Kachoo. But then he wasn't that. If you're not a Beatles fan, you have no idea what I'm talking about. And then the famous phone call. Undertaker, he's on the phone. Vince answers, or Vince calls him. Is this the Undertaker? Yeah, this is the Undertaker. And then we see the concept art. A lot of the stuff has been covered on the last ride. He was going to be the Undertaker with a sickle. Maybe he could have chopped Bruce Pritchard's head off. That would have been nice. Fuck Bruce Pritchard, by the way. I'm sorry he's still alive. From Death Valley, I give you the Undertaker. And with that, Ted DiBiase, years before he built the people of Mississippi for a bunch of money they never fucking deserve, because let's be honest, religious people like that are idiots. Even though Teddy's a great goddamn promo and a hell of a worker, that's why you maybe don't do that to suckers. But nevertheless, debut, great. I vividly remember getting it on VHS. I didn't get the pay-per-view at the time, but I got the VHS from the local video store. Yes, VHS, that's how fucking old I am. And I remember watching it, and I even remember getting the tape of Mania 7 and seeing him squash Jimmy Snuka. Fuck Jimmy Snuka, by the way. Should have freaking rotted a whole lot. He should have met The Undertaker a lot sooner. Should have met him back in 1983 for what he did to Nancy. And debut, he beats Coco. He beats up Dusty Rhodes. They count him out and everything. And then we go from there. Fuck Lord Alfred Hayes also. Roddy Piper is not a fan of him. A lot of people you find out stuff about in the, from the old days and everything. You're like, wow, there were some noted shitbags. The eye roll was done by accident in a match with Greg Valentine. That was just everybody else going to sleep during Greg Valentine matches in the 90s. And then Undertaker talking about, he wasn't home a lot. He had to get through he had to, delve into his character. He was rising up and everything. He had Brother Love as his manager, didn't fit at all. Did not fit at all. Percy Pringle, who became Paul Bearer, as Percy Pringle had managed, Texas Red, aka Mark Callis, the Undertaker, in his early run in World Class. And then they were reunited, and Paul Bearer was a licensed mortician. Perfect. Fucking stars, moons, and all the planets aligned in every goddamn universe for this. I mean, I'm gonna say right now, if Paul Bearer character hadn't come along rather, Undertaker gimmick would have been done in 2 years. He shouldn't have talked at first. Grow to when he can cut promos. Paul Bearer cut them perfectly. This is exactly what they needed to fucking do. And then they bounce around the timeline a whole lot here. They talk about him facing Sid, and it was in Houston, and his mother was in the front row, and Sid was trash talking her, and she was trying to get over the rail. Because you never mess with a Texas mom. You mess with her kids, she will. I mean, that's pretty much any mother, but especially Texas mothers. They got something else going on where they will run at you. They don't care if you're 8 feet tall, 6 feet tall, 600 pounds, 50 pounds. They will run at you and they will hurt you. Texas fans are something else. But she did mention how I don't ever want to sit that close. They're like, don't worry, you won't. Then they bounced back to 1991. Hulkamania is dead, Monsoon, for 8 days. Hogan just had to get his win back. Hogan always has to. And Hogan made it seem like, oh, you injured me, brother, but it's all right. And then you saw the head came nowhere near hitting the chair. And it's just because Hogan was a master politician. That Randy Savage is always better than. Randy Savage is always better than Hogan. I am going to, by the way, review the season 1 episodes as they pop up on A&E, so you'll find those reviews as well. So, they completely skipped over his feuds with Kamala. Giant Gonzalez, which is probably smart. Apparently a nice guy. Couldn't fucking wrestle a leg. Mabel, shattering his orbital socket because Mabel was a klutz. And also Kama Mustafa, a.k.a. the Godfather. And then the feud with Kane. They came back to the feud, 96 feud with Foley and a 98 feud. But they talked about the build and everything. Originally, he was going to be called Kane the Undertaker, and then Undertaker came up. Undertaker's brother came up. That feud. I've talked about that before. I'm not going to get into a long dissertation, but it was great at first. It was great when they feuded, then when they teamed up, but then when they kept going back and forth, it eventually got watered down. That being said, that build to Mania 14 and the subsequent Inferno match, and them teaming up a little bit later in 98 was pretty goddamn cool to see. The WWF figures, I actually used to have a bunch of those when I was a kid. Unfortunately, they got damaged when there was a storage accident, and unfortunately, they got damaged. Shame, but them's the breaks. And then they show Foley. They talk about the King of the Ring, Hell in a Cell match. Foley being thrown off the cage, through the cage. Terry Funk suggested he start on top. The blood, the tax, all that. Talked about that match plenty. That was a great moment, though. Foley was monumentally stupid for what he did, but it did define an era. And Vince even said, Cactus or Foley or whatever you have. Thank you for everything you've done. I never want to see anything like that again. And don't blame him. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's plenty to knock Vince for, but he didn't want one of his talents to die on camera, at least until a year later when he continued a pay-per-view. By using the wrong cable company. Back to this. He's had 17, 20 surgeries, fixed various things, torn muscles, broken bones, and anal bleeding. What? Wow. This is where I have a bit of a sticking point with Taker. He did it for the love. He did it for the money, because Vince paid him well, because he stuck with him through the Attitude Era. When he could have gone to WCW for a whole lot of money, he wouldn't have been able to take the Undertaker gimmick with him, but my God, he would have made a shit ton of money. He ended up making way more money in the long run because WCW is not a well-run business either. But that probably would have ripped the heart out of WWE, WWF at the time. And Undertaker, sure, made huge paydays, but he also, in my opinion, ended up tarnishing his legacy in the ring by continuing to come back and have subsequently subpar performances. Back to this. He was Undertaker in public, Regis Philbin. Rest in peace, Regis. Such a fan. I mean, his appearances on TV. His appearances on Mania 7. Regis was so good. Regis was great. The BSK, with Yoko, Savio, Godfather, um, Rikishi, the Godwins, other people that I'm sure I totally fucking missed. He missed out on his kids growing up. Of course, he named his two sons Gunner and Colt. Dumb two-way fuck. Yeah, that had to bleed in here. But the evolution of his look and everything from the early gear to the more iconic gear and look at the American Badass thing totally glossed over, which I don't think was the worst part of his career, was definitely very true to real life. And his Mania stuff, I would argue, by the way, his match with Flair at Mania 18 was criminally underrated. They skipped over him, having that handicap match where Nathan Jones did a run in didn't cause a DQ. Referee just totally looked the other way. Whatever. 2 matches with Shawn. Mania 25 is better than 26, I argue, just by a hair. The 2 matches with Triple H, Mania 28 was way better than 27. 27, I mean, look, it was a long story. And I'm sorry, end of an era should have actually been the end of an era. Had he retired there, his legacy would have been intact. Maybe even after the streak ended, because Brock didn't need to end the streak. I still maintain that to this day. I would have had Bray do it, because that would have launched him a whole lot better. But nevertheless, Goldberg, by the way, his biography will be next week. That's certainly going to be interesting. I'm going to have a lot to say about that as a Bret Hart fan, but also as somebody that was a fan of Goldberg's work, that appreciated him during the Monday Night Wars. And Michelle McCool and him fell for each other, and he hung on way too long in the ring. Way too long. Hall of Fame induction. He insisted that Vince do it, and there you go. That's a nice wrapped up story right there. Again, hard to encapsulate a 30-year career. I mean, they skipped over a lot, but they hit the high points. It was cool to see the old footage, especially that South Africa stuff, to hear from Steve Simpson. And there you go. There's an encapsulation of one of the most iconic characters ever in wrestling. And a goddamn guy that, deep down, the character's great. The guy himself is a Trump donating piece of shit, but nevertheless, maybe his kids will grow up to be smarter than he was. So, agree, disagree, what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Wetland. I'll see you soon.